The station was cold in the way that space always made things cold, not the kind that bit at your skin, but the kind that sat behind the walls and reminded you how far you were from anything warm or familiar. Cole Hartley walked down the corridor of Galactic Union Academy like a man who had been walking down corridors his whole life and had long since stopped thinking about it. His boots hit the floor with a flat, even sound. He had a bag over one shoulder. He had a cup of coffee from the commissary that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago and that he was still drinking because it was there, and it was coffee. He checked the room number on the wall panel, looked at his schedule, looked back at the panel. He went in. The class was already running. 30-something students from a dozen different species sat in tiered rows, facing a wide projection screen. At the front stood a tall Sith Ali, Professor Von Eight-Limbed, with a speaking voice like dry paper, folding in on itself. He did not stop when Cole walked in. He did not look up. Cole found an open seat near the middle. He sat down. He pulled out a small notebook, actual paper, actual pen, a thing that made the 3 students nearest to him stare, and he wrote the date at the top of the page. The screen at the front showed Earth, not the full planet. A section of it. Dense forest, brown rivers, mountains with snow on them that did not care what season it. Looks at a photograph of their kitchen. Familiar, not special, just a place he knew. A student named Drix was at the front of the room. Drix was Corvin, smooth-scaled, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of easy confidence that came from spending your whole life being one of the larger things in any given room. He had a holographic animal rotating slowly in the air beside him. A grizzly bear. It turned slowly on its axis, and the size markers beside it listed weight and height and bite force in 3 different unit systems. Drix was explaining that Earth's apex predators were driven entirely by instinct, hunger, territory, nothing more than biological programming, dressed up in muscle and fur. He said this with the tone of someone sharing an interesting fact about a place they had read about but never been. They are impressive in a physical sense, Drix said, gesturing at the rotating bear. But cognitively, they operate at the baseline threat level. Reactive, predictable. If you understand the stimulus, you understand the animal. Several students nodded. Someone in the back row typed notes. Cole looked at the bear. He thought about a morning 6 years ago. Before the academy, before the exchange program, before any of this, a morning in late September on a trail in Montana, where he had come around a bend and found a grizzly about 40 ft away, standing over a kill. He thought about the way time had gone, very still and very clear. He thought about what he had done, which was nothing, which was exactly the right thing, which had taken everything he had to manage. He looked at Drix. He said nothing. Professor Vun's compound eyes moved across the room in the slow, sweeping way of someone conducting a census. They landed on Cole. "We have a new student today," Vun's said. "A human on the diplomatic exchange program." Perhaps, and there was something in the pause, something that was not quite amusement but lived next to it. "Our new student would like to add something to the presentation." 30 faces turned toward Cole. He looked at the bear on the hologram. He looked at Drix. He looked back at the bear. He left out the part where humans hunt. Those, Cole said. The room went quiet. Not the dramatic kind of quiet that fills itself with gasps and whispers. The other kind. The kind where something has been said. That requires everyone in the room to briefly recalibrate. Drix turned around. He looked at Cole with an expression that was polite but not yet convinced. Hunt them, he said. For food. Sometimes for food, Cole said. Sometimes for population management. Sometimes because one came into a campground and they needed to remove it. With what method? Rifle usually. Bow in some regions. Trap if the situation required it. Drix made a sound that was the Corvin equivalent of a light laugh. Humans hunt apex predators. Yeah, Cole said. Voluntarily. Yeah. Drix looked at Professor Vun. Vun's expression was unreadable, which, for a Sithari, was fairly normal. He gestured for Drix to continue the presentation. Drix continued. Cole wrote in his notebook. Sitting one seat to Cole's left was a student named Nari. She was Lethian, small, pale, with a faint bioluminescent shimmer under her skin that shifted color the way water shifts light. She had chosen the seat beside Cole that morning because no one else would sit near the human, and she felt, in a way, she could not fully explain that this was unkind. She looked at Cole sideways now. He was writing notes. His handwriting was small and even and fit a lot of words into a small space. Is that true? She asked very quietly. That humans hunt them? Yeah, he said just as quietly. Are they not dangerous? Cole thought about the trail. The 40 FT. The stillness. Very, he said. She stared at him. Her bioluminescence shifted slightly. Pale blue that he would later learn meant something close to baffled curiosity. Then why do you hunt them? He thought about how to answer that. It was not a complicated question, but it was a question that came from a place that had never needed to think about the answer. Because sometimes you have to, he said. She looked like she wanted to ask more. She did not. The presentation was still going. On the screen, Drix had moved on from the grizzly to a great white shark. The size markers updated. The threat classification listed it as a coastal apex predator, non-cognitive. Stimulus response only. Drix explained that humans, by contrast, were one of the less physically capable species to originate from a Class 4 death world. Medium build. No natural armor. Limited sensory range. What made them notable at all was the environment they came from, not anything the species itself had developed. Cole wrote in his notebook. He wrote, they think the planet made us dangerous. Then underneath it he wrote, they are not wrong about the planet. Then he stopped writing and looked at the front of the room. Drix had moved on to the modules. Conclusion. The summary read, Earth fauna high. Physical threat, low cognitive. Complexity. Earth's dominant sapient species. Anomalous survival record attributed to tool use and environmental adaptation. Current galactic threat classification. Moderate conditional. Cole read the summary on the board. He read the classification. He did not say anything. Professor Vaughn closed the lesson. He assigned readings from the Xenobiology Index on Death World. Environmental pressures. He told students that next week there would be a guest lecturer, a special session, he said, that would give the class a real understanding of what predator cognition looked like at its most developed. Students filed out. Nari lingered. She looked at Cole as he packed his notebook into his bag. The guest lecturer, she said. Do you know what species the professor is bringing? No. I heard it is a wrack hunter. Cole stopped packing his bag. He looked at her. Then he went back to packing. Okay, he said. She watched him. Her bioluminescence flickered a pale yellow, something between nervousness and interest. Does that not concern you? She asked. Cole put the bag over his shoulder. He picked up his lukewarm coffee. He took a sip of it like a man who had already decided how he felt about most things and did not plan to renegotiate. Not really, he said. He walked out. Nari stood in the empty classroom for a moment, looking at the door. The hologram of the grizzly bear was still rotating slowly in the air where Drex had left it, turning and turning, its size markers blinking in the low light. She thought about the way Cole had said, not really, not dismissive, not brave, just settled, like a man who had already taken the measure of something and found it familiar. She did not know what to do with that. She turned off the hologram and went to her next class. The week passed the way weeks at the academy tended to pass, dense with reading, thin on sleep, and occasionally interrupted by the particular discomfort of being in a room full of species who had not spent much time thinking about you before you arrived. Cole attended his classes. He did the readings. He ate in the commissary by himself most mornings and with Nari most evenings, which had started by accident on the third day and had since become something neither of them discussed but both of them relied on. By the time the day of the guest lecture arrived, most of the class had forgotten it was coming. Cole had not forgotten. He arrived early. He sat in the same seat, middle row, left side, good angle on both the door and the front of the room. He put his notebook on the desk. He did not open it yet. Lena Marsh came in a few minutes later. She was human. She had been at the academy for 2 semesters already, which meant she had developed the particular skill of moving through the station without causing the low-level social turbulence that Cole still generated just by existing in a corridor. She was pre-med track, practical in the way of people who had decided early that most problems could be solved if you just looked at them clearly enough. She saw Cole and came to sit in the back row, 2 seats from the wall, which gave her a clear view of the entire room. She had brought something from the commissary in a sealed container, a pressed grain wrap that passed for food, in 3 different star systems. She set it on the desk beside her. Cole looked at her. She looked back. Don't, she said. I didn't say anything. You were about to ask why I'm here. I'm here because Vaughn is bringing in a wrack hunter for a demonstration, and I want to watch the class's faces. Cole looked at the front of the room. That's either very funny or very unkind, he said. Wait and see, she said and opened her container. Students filled in over the next 10 minutes. Nari came in and took her usual seat beside Cole. Drix came in with 2 other Corvin students and settled into the front row, which was where Drix always sat. Professor Vaughn arrived last, which was unusual. He was followed through the door by something that made the air in the room chained before anyone had consciously processed what they were seeing. Sergeant Hale of the Vrak Dominion was 7 feet tall. He moved the way dense things move, not fast but with a weight that made the floor seem more real under him than under anyone else. His skin was deep gray and plated at the shoulders and forearms in a way that was biological, not armor. The Vrak equivalent of knuckles grown over generations of kneading them. His eyes were forward-facing, wide-set, designed for tracking things that moved. He had been decorated by his Dominion for successful hunts on 4 different planets. He had hunted 17 classified apex species. He walked to the front of the room and stood there. He did not introduce himself. Vaughn introduced him, reading from a data card listing credentials and hunting records in a tone of barely contained pride, as if he had borrowed something impressive and wanted the class to know it. Hale said nothing. He looked at the class. Cole looked back at him. This took approximately 2 seconds, happened without any movement or sound, and was noticed by no one except Lena, who paused mid-chew and watched. Vaughn explained the session. Hale would demonstrate Vrak Predator, cognition, threat assessment, environmental reading, instinctive tracking data. This was, Vaughn said, what true apex cognition looked like. It was the highest developed biological threat response in the known galaxy. Hale began. He explained through the translation unit clipped to his collar how Vrak hunters assessed any new environment. Entry points, exit points, ambient noise patterns, heat signatures, the way light moved. He explained it the way a person explains a process. They have done so many times it has stopped feeling like a process and started feeling like breathing. He had the class run a simple version of the entry point exercise, 3 minutes to map the room's exit routes without standing up or turning around. Most students managed 2 or 3. Drix got 5, which he reported with visible satisfaction. Cole looked up from his notebook. He said 7. He listed them by direction without looking up from the page again. Hale turned his head. It was a small movement. Not dramatic. Just a turn, the way you turn when something has made a sound you want to locate. Vaughn, pleased with the exercise, moved to the next demonstration. He asked Hale to conduct a live threat assessment of the room. Walk us through your instinctive read. Vaughn said, show the class what predator cognition produces in a real environment. Hale turned to face the room. He started at the left side of the room and moved his gaze across it in a slow arc. He described each student he looked at in brief, neutral terms. Nari, low physical threat, high evasion potential. A Corvin student beside Drex, moderate threat, reactive profile. A Sethali student in the 3rd row. Environmental threat only, confined spaces. He went through 12 students. He got to Cole. He stopped. The pause lasted 4 seconds. In Vrak body language, 4 seconds of unmoving attention meant one specific thing. Something has registered that requires full processing before the next action. It was the pause a hunter made before deciding how to proceed. Drex noticed. He turned around in his seat to look at Cole, who was sitting with his pen resting on his notebook and his posture entirely unchanged. Vaughn noticed. He said in the gentle tone of a professor managing an awkward moment, Sergeant Hale, your assessment of the human student, Hale said in his flat translated voice. That one has already assessed me. The room was quiet. I'm sorry, Vaughn said. When I entered the room, Hale said, that one looked at me the way a hunter looks at something it has not yet decided about. It finished deciding in the first 30 seconds. I do not know what conclusion it reached. Vaughn's expression did something complicated. He tried to smooth it back to academic neutrality. I believe you may be reading a cultural behavior, something more significant than. I do not misread, Hale said. He said it without heat, without insistence, the way you say a thing that is simply true and does not require defending. The room was very quiet. Lena in the back row had stopped eating entirely. She was looking at Cole. Cole was looking at the front of the room. His face was the same as it had been since he sat down. Nari's bioluminescence had a pale, flickering white. She turned to look at Cole. She did so the way you look at something that has just resolved into focus after being blurry for a while. Drix in the front row said, not unkindly, but with the genuine uncertainty of someone whose model has just developed a crack. You assessed him. Cole looked at Drix. When he walked in, yeah. And Cole thought about it. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, not for long, but completely. He moves like someone who's used to being the most dangerous thing in the room, Cole said. That's good training. The problem is it's also a habit. Habits are readable. The room sat with that for a moment. Hale looked at Cole for another second. Then he looked away. He turned back to Vaughn and said in the same flat tone, continue the session. Vaughn continued. The demonstration went on for another 40 minutes. Hale was impressive throughout. Controlled, precise, demonstrably extraordinary by any reasonable standard. At the end, when students were filing out, Hale walked past Cole's row without looking at him. Then he stopped. He stood still for a moment with his back to the row. He said, to no particular direction, what do you do on your planet? Cole was putting his notebook away. Search and rescue. Mountains mostly. Hale was quiet for a moment. You find people who are lost. Yeah. In terrain that would kill them. That's usually why they're lost. Hale made a sound that the translation unit did not convert. He walked out. Lena came down from the back row. She stood beside Cole and watched the door Hale had gone through. Mountains, she said. Montana, Cole said. And you applied for a diplomatic exchange to a space station. I was voluntold, he said. She laughed. It was short and real. She put her container under her arm and walked out ahead of him. Nari fell into step on Cole's other side. Her bioluminescence had settled into a steady, thoughtful green. Cole, she said. What is a voluntold? It means someone asked you in a way that didn't leave room for no. She considered this. That seems unkind. It happens, he said. They walked down the corridor. The station hummed around them. Through the viewport at the far end of the hall, a star system. Cole did not know the name of, turned in the black. He looked at it for a second. Then he looked at the floor in front of him and kept walking. The wilderness simulation module was in the lower deck of the station behind 2 security doors and a sign that read in 6 languages. that all injury waivers had to be signed. Before entry, Cole had signed his on the walk down. Nari had signed hers with a hand that was slightly less steady than usual. Drix had signed his without reading it, which was either confidence or the kind of carelessness that tends to sort itself out eventually. The module looked from the outside like a large gray box. From the inside it looked like a forest. Not perfectly. The light was a little flat. The air smelled like recycled atmosphere, trying its best. But the trees were real, grown in soil. Beds beneath the simulation floor, and the terrain was built from compressed earth and stone that had been imported at considerable expense from a Class 3 world. The Galactic Union took its applied ecology curriculum seriously. Professor Vaughn stood at the observation deck above the module entrance with 2 other faculty members and a small recording unit. He explained the exercise to the 3 students lined up below him. They would enter the forest. A VRAC-designed tracking drone would be released 60 seconds after them. The drone had thermal sensors, audio sensors, and a movement analysis system that could distinguish a Corbin's ground heavy footfall from a Lithian's near silent step. It had completed this exercise 18 times in the past 2 semesters. Its average time to locate and tag target was 9 minutes 40 seconds. Its longest run had been 11 minutes 12 seconds. The goal was survival time. Stay untagged as long as possible. The drone would not cause physical harm. It would simply mark a target with a low frequency signal when it had a confirmed location lock. Vaughn told them the exercise would run for 30 minutes maximum. Then he looked at Cole and added, in the tone of a man being academically thorough, for the human student, the drone has been calibrated for human thermal output in breath pattern. Cole said, okay. They went in. The forest closed around them. The light dropped. The air got thicker, not unpleasantly, just in the way that real outdoor spaces have a texture that open rooms do not. Drix immediately went forward. He had a plan which he had shared on the walk down in considerable detail. Use Corbin wide-range sensory perception to stay ahead of the drone sweep pattern. Keep moving. Put distance between himself and the entry point. The drone would have to chase him, and Corbin in open terrain was fast. It was a good plan for a fast threat. Nari went left. She found a thick cluster of root systems near the western wall of the module, pressed herself into a hollow between 2 of them, and began dampening her bioluminescence in layers, the Lethian equivalent of going dark. By the time she was fully dimmed, she was nearly invisible to standard sensors. She went still. She barely breathed. Cole went right. He walked maybe 40 m into the trees, and then he stopped. He stood still and listened. The simulation was good enough that there were ambient sounds, something that moved in the canopy, a low wind current from a vent near the ceiling that played against the upper branches. He listened to all of it for about 30 seconds. Then he turned around and walked back toward the entry point. Not to the entry point, to within about 20 m of it. He found a root system on the eastern edge of the module, thick old growth, trees that the Academy had clearly spent money on, and he sat down with his back against the largest root. He pulled his knees up slightly. He made himself low and still. He waited 60 seconds after the students had Entered the drone launched. It was the size of a large bird, built from matte black composite with a slow rotor system that barely disturbed the air. It entered the forest and began its sweep pattern, a systematic grid, starting from the entry point and moving outward in expanding arcs. It was thorough. It was designed by engineers who understood how prey moved. It swept east first, found nothing, swept west, registered a faint warm signature in the direction Nari had gone, moved toward it. Nari heard it coming. Her bioluminescence was almost fully dark. She controlled her breathing to the minimum required. She stayed absolutely still. The drone passed 3 m from her hollow. It paused. Its sensors cycled. The thermal read was ambiguous. Her body temperature had dropped with the dimming, a Lethian ability that most sensor systems were not fully calibrated for. It moved on. Nari released a breath she had been holding for 90 seconds. Her pale shimmer returned slightly, faint silver that she could not fully suppress when her chest was tight. The drone swept north. It found Drix. Drix had been moving fast, the way he had planned, but fast movement in a thermal sensor environment is the equivalent of shouting. The drone locked him at the 6-minute mark and tagged him. He stopped running and stood in the middle of the forest with the low frequency mark buzzing against his sensor patch, looking at the drone with an expression that suggested the plan had been better in theory. The drone released him. Its protocol was to log and move, and swept back south. It found Nari at the 9-minute mark. The silver shimmer had been enough. Faint warm edge in a space that should have read cold. It tagged her gently and moved on. It swept back toward the entry point. It found nothing. It swept again. Still nothing. Its sensors cycled. Human thermal signature, 37 degrees C. Standard. Breath pattern, detectable at 12 m. Audio boots on soil, detectable at 20 m. It ran the room again. The entry sector was already cleared. The drone had swept it at the start. It did not recheck cleared zones. Its programming was efficient. Efficient systems have known edges, and the edge of this one was that it trusted its own previous sweep. At the 22-minute mark, the proctor, monitoring from above, touched a control on the observation panel and paused the simulation. The drone has entered a recalibration loop, he said. It has lost the human target. Pausing for location, Vaughn stepped forward. He looked at the thermal map on the panel beside him. The map showed the full module interior. It showed 2 tag positions, Drix in the north section, Nari near the west wall, and near the east wall close to the entry point, a small warm shape sitting against a root system. He's at the entry quadrant, the proctor said. That's the first zone the drone cleared. Vaughn said. Yes. Vaughn looked at the shape on the map. He was quiet for a moment. They found Cole sitting with his back against a root, ankles crossed, eating a ration bar from his jacket pocket. He looked up when the proctor's voice came through the module speaker to tell him the simulation was paused. Yeah, he said. Okay. They brought the team out. Drix came back from the north looking like a man reviewing a list of mistakes. Nari came from the west, her bioluminescence cycling back to normal, looking exhausted in the particular way of someone who has been deeply, completely still for a long time. Cole came from near the door. The proctor logged their survival times. Drix 6 minutes. Nari 9. Cole 22 minutes and still running when the exercise was paused. Drix looked at Cole. He was not angry. He was genuinely trying to understand. "Ow," he said. Cole thought about it. He folded the ration bar wrapper and put it back in his pocket. The drone swept the entry zone first, he said. Cleared it. Moved out. It wouldn't come back to a cleared zone. Why would it? I just stayed in the one place it had already decided was empty. Drix processed this. You moved toward the search origin. Yeah. That is the opposite of what prey does. Cole looked at him. Yeah, he said again. Nari's bioluminescence was a quiet, wondering blue. Where did you learn that? She asked. Cole thought about his grandfather. A big man, quiet in the way of people, who had lived most of their lives outside. Flannel shirts. Coffee at 4:00 in the morning. A patience that had felt when Cole was young, like it was aimed at nothing, and that he had only later understood was aimed at everything. My grandfather hunted elk, Cole said. He told me once, you don't run from a hunter. You make the hunter run from itself. Nobody said anything for a moment. Drix turned the sentence over. He looked like a man finding a loose thread and deciding whether to pull it. Vaughn, watching from the observation deck, had not moved. He was looking at the entry zone on the thermal map, the small warm shape that had sat undetected for 22 minutes in the first place the drone had looked. He stayed on the deck after the others had filed out. He looked at the map for a long time. Then he went back to his office and opened his unit on the Apex Ecology curriculum. He sat in front of it for a while. He did not begin writing yet. He was still thinking. Outside his viewport, the station turned slowly against the black. The stars were the same as they always were, constant, cold, indifferent. Inside his office, Vaughn began to understand that he had been wrong about something in a way that would take real work to correct. He found to his own mild surprise that he was not unhappy about this. The council chamber was the kind of room that had been designed to make whoever sat in the middle of it feel like they were being studied. High walls, a long table, chairs built for species twice Cole's height, which meant that when he sat in one, he sat with his feet flat on the floor and his back straight and still managed to look slightly smaller than the room expected. He did not seem to mind. Lena was in the chair beside him. She had been told twice that this hearing was not open to general attendance. She had said both times that she understood, and then she had come anyway. When the administrative aide at the door had pointed out that she was not on the attendance list, she had said she was the human student's cultural liaison, and that cross-species proceedings of this nature required one. She did not have documentation for this, because the role did not exist. The aide had let her in. Cole had looked at her when she sat down. She had looked at him. Neither of them said anything about it. At the head of the table sat Admiral Pesci. She was Sithari, old in the way that Sithari elders got old, the color bleaching slowly from her exoskeleton until it was close to white, the movement of her limbs slower but more deliberate. She had been an administrator at the Galactic Union for 30 years and had the specific patience of someone who had stopped being surprised by most things and was now simply managing them. Professor Vun sat to her left with a data tablet and a small stack of printed notes that he had organized into sections. A xenobiologist named Dr. Orit sat beside Vun, six-limbed, round-bodied, from the Grelian system, known across 3 academic institutions for his work on death world species physiology. He had a holographic display unit set up in front of him. Vun opened by explaining the inquiry. He was careful. He used the phrase anomalous performance indicators rather than anything that might suggest he had simply been wrong. He walked through the events, the field simulation, the drone exercise, the survival time. He presented Drix's 6 minutes and Nari's 9 as baseline references for non-human performance. Then he presented Cole's 22. He was precise. He was thorough. He was, without quite saying so, asking the council to tell him what to do with a student who had done something that did not fit his existing classification system. Admiral Pesh listened without moving. Then Dr. Orth began his portion. He had been studying human biology for 6 years. He had published 4 papers on death world physiology, 2 of which had been cited by the Galactic Union Defense Council, a fact he mentioned without appearing to notice he had mentioned it. He pulled up his holographic display and walked through the data. He started with the basics. The human skeletal structure, 206 bones, more than most species of comparable size, with a bone density that was high for a soft tissue organism. The muscular configuration, slope which dominant in the legs, designed not for speed but for sustained output over long distances. He explained persistence hunting, which was a technique humans had used for most of their evolutionary history. Run after prey at a pace the prey cannot maintain for hours without overheating, because humans dissipate heat through sweat glands in a way that most Earth fauna cannot match. They are not fast, Orth said. They are designed to outlast. He moved through the physiological list. Hands, opposable grip, fine motor control, the ability to throw projectiles with a precision that no other known sapient species had developed naturally. Eyes forward-facing, depth perception dominant, designed for tracking movement. The brain's response to fear, elevated cortisol, adrenaline, measurable physical preparation for conflict, functionally identical to every other mammalian species on Earth. Then he paused. The difference, he said, is the override mechanism. He pulled up a second display. A neural scan. Human brain activity during a high-stress scenario. Most species with this fear response act on it, he said. Flight, freeze, or fight determined by instinct and the individual's threat assessment. Humans have this response. They also have a secondary cognitive layer that can choose not to act on it, not suppress it. It is still running. They feel the fear, and then they decide what to do anyway. The room was quiet. We have found no other species, Orit said, with this particular architecture. The fear functions normally. The decision is made independently of it. Cole was looking at the ceiling. Lena leaned slightly toward him. "You doing okay?" she said very quietly. He looked at the ceiling for another second. Then he looked at her. "They're describing me like I'm a new species of life," he said. She looked at the display, at the neural scan, at Orit gesturing toward the secondary cognitive layer with the enthusiasm of a man who had found a very interesting thing. You kind of are, she said. He looked back at the ceiling. Or it continued. He moved through psychological endurance. Data. A category label appeared on the display. It read, species that continue after it is no longer rational to continue. It listed the Galactic Union's records. 3 other species made the list in minor capacities. Humans were at the top of it by a significant margin. The data went back 1,400 years. One was watching Cole as Orit spoke. He had been watching him on and off since the hearing began, the way you watch something you thought you understood and are now revising. Cole was reading the category label on the display. His expression had not changed. He looked like a man reading a sign that said something he already knew. Lena was very still. She had not looked away from the display since the category appeared. She was pre-med. She understood what she was reading better than most people in the room. She read the data and then she read it again. The oldest record in the category, 1,400 years ago, was from a species observation log. A contact team had watched a group of humans in a pre-contact agricultural community survive a 3-year drought. Through methods the contact teams report described as illogical, persistence in the face of mathematically certain failure. They had planted crops in dry ground and hand-carried water from a river 4 miles away every day for 3 years because the alternative was to stop and die. They had survived. The contact team's concluding note read, "This species does not appear to recognize the point at which continuation becomes irrational." Admiral Pesh, who had not spoken since the hearing began, put down the data tablet she had been holding. She looked at Cole. "What do you consider yourself?" she said. The room waited. Cole thought about the question. He thought about it for longer than anyone expected, not because it was hard, but because he wanted to say the right thing and not a thing that just sounded like the right thing. "Tired," he said. "Mostly." Pesh looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Tired of what?" He thought about that too. He looked at his hands on the table. "Of being the thing in the room that nobody has a file for," he said. "But that's not a complaint. It's just a description." Pesh nodded slowly. She looked at Vaughn. Vaughn looked at his notes. He looked at the display. He looked at Cole. He said, in the tone of a man making a formal record, "The inquiry is not a criticism of the student. It is a recognition that our curriculum contains an error. The error is mine." The room was quiet. Lena looked at Vaughn. Cole looked at Vaughn. Vaughn was looking at his notes, which he folded closed. Pesh said, "The council will note the recommendation for curriculum review. Dr. Orit, your data will be submitted to the Xenobiology Index." Orit nodded and began closing his displays. Pesh looked at Cole one more time. She said nothing else to him, but she looked at him the way Admiral Pesh looked at things she had decided were worth understanding with full attention and no rush. The hearing was closed. In the corridor afterward, Cole and Lena walked side by side. The station hummed. A cleaning drone moved along the far wall in the slow, practical way of things with one job. "How does it feel?" Lena asked. "Being a case study." Cole thought about it. "Like being a weather system," he said. Everyone wants to understand it. Nobody asks the weather how it's doing. She looked at him sideways. Then she laughed short, real, the kind that comes before you can decide whether to. They walked. The corridor opened into the main atrium, where the ceiling viewport showed the stars in full, unobstructed, enormous. The kind of view that made the station feel very small and very far from everything at the same time. Cole looked at the stars for a second. Then he looked at the floor in front of him and kept walking. For 3 weeks after the hearing, Professor Vaughn did not change the curriculum. He thought about changing it. He had his notes open every evening in his office, spread across his desk the way a person spreads something out when they want to understand all of it at once. He read them. He read the xenobiology data Orit had submitted. He read the old contact team reports. He read the entry in the Galactic Union's threat index that classified humans as moderate, conditional, and he thought about Cole sitting in the simulation with his back against a root, eating a ration bar while a drone, designed by the best VRAC military engineers in the galaxy, lost him in the first sector it had cleared. He thought about the word conditional. He thought about what condition would ever make the threat classification drop. He never found a satisfying answer. On the 22nd day, he sat down and rewrote the entire unit. He worked through the night in the way that Cethel elders worked, slowly, thoroughly, without stopping for anything that wasn't the work. By the time the station's light cycle shifted to morning, he had something he was willing to teach. He called the revised unit on the persistence of the human death worlder a corrective. He did not tell the class in advance. The day of the final session of the semester, they filed in the way classes always file in for last meeting, a little looser, a little more tired, the weight of assessment work sitting on most of them like a coat they had been wearing too long. Drix came in and sat in the front row. Nari came in and sat beside Cole. Lena, who was not technically enrolled in the class but had been attending since the week of the hearing, sat in the back row with the quiet legitimacy of someone who has been in a place long enough that no one questions it anymore. Cole sat down. He put his notebook on the desk. He looked at the front of the room. The screen was off. Vaughn stood in front of it without his data tablet, without his prepared slides, without the holographic display unit, just standing there, eight-limbed, old, in the flat light of a classroom at the end of a semester. He began to teach. He did not apologize. He did not make a speech about what he had previously gotten wrong or how he had come to see things differently. He simply started from the beginning and taught the correct version, the way builder tears out a wrong wall and replaces it without ceremony. He began with the Cambrian period. He explained what Earth had been doing to its living things for 600 million years, building them up and then crashing the conditions, driving the weak lines to extinction and pushing the survivors into configurations that could handle what came next. Ice ages, volcanic events, famines that lasted generations. He explained how this happened not once, but over and over in cycles, each one filtering out the organisms that could not adapt. Every major species that survived this process, Vaughn said, became something harder than what came before it. Earth did this approximately 40 times in recorded geological history. Humans arrived at the end of that Sequencer. He paused. They are not the strongest species, we. No, he said. They are not the fastest. Their sensory range is limited. Their lifespan is short. They have no natural armor and no venom. And no speed advantage. What they have is everything there. Planet took 40 rounds of extinction to produce. Drix was leaning forward in his seat. He was not taking notes. He was just listening, which was unusual. Enough that the student beside him had noticed. Vun moved through the biology, the persistence running, the sweat glands, the forward-facing eyes, the hands that could throw things with precision at distances that made them effective. Before any prey species could close the gap, he explained it not as a list of features but as a system, as a set of tools that had been built by 10,000 generations of needing them. Then he moved to the part he had spent the most time on. We have focused on the physical, he said. We have not adequately addressed the cognitive, and it is the cognitive that our classification has most significantly failed to account for. He pulled up a single file on the screen. Not a diagram, not a data chart, a video. It was old. By Earth's production standards, it was grainy and slightly washed out. It showed a road race, a long one, the kind that Cole, watching from his seat, recognized as a marathon by the mile. Markers on the course signs. The camera was focused on a single runner near the back of the field. The runner's form was breaking down. His left leg was not working correctly, not injured in any visible dramatic way, but failing in the small mechanical sense of a machine asked to do too much for too long. His arms were low. His pace had slowed to something that was barely faster than walking. He was not stopping. The class watched. The runner moved. The road went on. Vun let the video run for 90 seconds. Then he paused it. This is not an exceptional human, Vun said. This is not a trained soldier or a survival specialist or a search and rescue operator. This is a civilian who entered a race and is now finishing it in a state of physical failure. He will not place well. He will not be recorded as significant. He is finishing it because he chose to finish it, and he made the choice before he knew how hard it would become. The room was completely quiet. We classified humans as a death world species because of what their planet is, Vun said. We were not wrong about the planet. We were looking at the wrong thing. The planet did not give them physical tools that exceed what we know. It gave them something else. It gave them the architecture to make a decision and hold that decision past the point where the body argues against it. He looked at the class. They call various things by various names, he said. Duty, love, stubbornness, loyalty, honor. The label changes. The function is identical. They choose something and then they do not stop choosing it. Nari's bioluminescence had been shifting since the video began. A pale, rising blue that moved under her skin like something trying to surface. She did not know why. She had not expected this. She was holding very still in the way of someone who does not want to draw attention to the fact that something has gotten to them. Drix raised his hand. It was such an unusual thing for Drix to do. The two students near him turned to look. Why does he not stop? Drix asked. He was looking at the paused frame, the Runner mid-stride, form broken, still moving. The body is failing. The rational conclusion is to stop. Vaughn looked at Cole. The class looked at Cole. Cole looked at the screen. At the runner. At the mile markers. At the road going forward. He said because he told someone he would finish. The room sat with that. Nari's bioluminescence flared, sharp. Bright white. A full-body response she had no control over. It faded back in a few seconds to the pale blue it had been, but the flare had happened and the students around her had seen it. She did not explain it. She looked at the desk in front of her. She would think about why later. She would think about it for a long time. She would not find a neat answer, only the shape of one, something about the particular weight of a promise made before you know what it will cost you. Vaughn closed the lesson. He did not end with a summary. He did not list the key points for review. He let the sentence sit in the room, the way a teacher lets a good thing sit when they know the students need time with it. He dismissed the class. Students gathered their things. Conversation started in low voices, not the usual end of session noise, but something quieter, the sound of people thinking while they talked. Lena came down from the back row. She fell into step beside Cole in the doorway. Best class of the semester, she said. You're not enrolled, he said. Details. Nari caught up on Cole's other side. She was still faintly blue. The bioluminescence had not fully settled. She walked beside him without saying anything for half the corridor's length. Then she said, Cole, the person you told that you would finish. He walked. She said, did you finish? He was quiet for a long moment. The corridor went on. Other students passed them going the other direction, a group of Corvin, pair of Sethari, a tall Grellan student, carrying a stack of data tablets. Working on it, Cole said. Nari's bioluminescence shifted to a warm, steady green. They walked. The station hummed around them in its constant, practical way. Through the viewport at the end of the corridor, the stars were what they always were, cold, enormous, still, and so far away that looking at them was a kind of decision. Cole looked at them. Not for long. Just for a second, the way a man looks at something he has already decided he is going to reach and is simply checking that it is still there. Then he looked at the corridor ahead of him and kept walking.